Welcome to my studio. Welcome to my space. For those of you who are in the know, the Twilight Monk video game is about to launch. I'm only making a lot of videos about Twilight Monk, but I wanted to explore with this episode. I wanted to explore the origins of the character. As many of you know, I got my start in comic books, so a lot of what you're going to see as I dig through my old flat file of old original artwork and sketches and pages, my first days of using Photoshop, my first sketches and character and world building stuff and where a lot of things came from. Some of the characters that are in the game, these are some of the first sketches and locations from that. And so this might end up being a little bit meaty. It might end up being a lengthy video, but I thought, hey man, what better way to celebrate, a 20-year arc. I mean, I started drawing Twilight Monk 20 years ago. And so it's kind of the culmination of a lot of the work and perseverance. And believe me, a lot of slam doors along the way. A lot of people slamming doors in my face and a lot of getting shot down. And then I had to swallow my pride and go and work on, and all those games, small fry games just to like make ends meet. But here, getting back to what really matters, getting back to Twilight Monk, this is where it all began. These are the origins of the character. So let's dig into the history of Twilight Monk, episode 1. So I wanted to start out with this one. Now, to give you a little backstory, my history was in comic books. I had been drawing a comic book called Creed since 1993, since I was a teenager in high school. It was a fairly popular comic book. It's how I knew how to build worlds. And in fact, I ended up moving to Los Angeles to pitch animated shows around like 1999 and early 2000s. So I knew that the best way to kind of figure out a world and build out a universe was to create character sheets like this. So you see all these different expressions and different poses and types of ways that the character would be presented on screen. So you'd see, I had all these old like art books and stuff, and it would show the characters in different expressions. So I wanted to include that and like show the kind of dynamic kung fu kicking and stuff that you would see from this character. The kind of 90s style big feet, big hands, and four-fingered hands really came from Creed. In fact, Twilight Monk was originally a sequel to the Creed comic that I had gotten my start doing when I was a teenager in high school. And so it was really like this universe within the universe of Creed. And that was the original intention. But I just I'd always loved drawing kung fu characters and martial arts characters and dragons. And this was not something that you could pitch in an American comic book. It did not go over well. They did not like it. I got shot down many, many times trying to pitch a kung fu character that fights dragons and stuff. There was just no publisher was having that. So I put it down for a little while. So the entire intention of creating Twilight Monk in 2002, when I was doing these sketches, yes, I started it out as a comic book. I love comics. I love making comics. I love creating worlds. But I really saw it as like the groundwork for creating a universe the way that the 7 universe was fully realized. I wanted to make JRPGs, man. So and it was around that time I decided I want to work in video games. And so I actually did pretty much soon after doing this design, doing these pages. So around that time, I was just carrying around a sketchbook everywhere I went. If I couldn't get my hands on a sketchbook, I carry 8.5 by 11 printer sheets. And that's what you're seeing here. These are the first sketches of Winstig Thistleheim. And you might recognize him as a shopkeeper from the Twilight Monk game, if you played the demo or if you've got the game. This other guy is just sort of like a little wood elf guy. Around that time, I started reading a lot of Tolkien. This was right when the films were being released. So I got really big into that kind of like whimsical fantasy type of stuff. And I wanted to incorporate that into something that was super stylish, like the comics I was known for on the Creed universe. And I was really struggling with coming off of the Writer series where they kept asking me to draw more realistic. And I was like, nah, I want to get back to doing more fantasy crazy stuff, like what I love, and you'd be surprised, man. The pushback I got for doing stylized stuff back then was out of freaking control. Everyone I worked for was just telling me, draw more realistic. Anyway, so when I couldn't get my hands on 8.5 by 11 printer sheets, I'd get my hands on some graph paper. And graph paper is great because it has basically a little grid on it. And it's great for designing things like levels for, pixel-based platformers. And so I was just like exploring the world building aspects. So I designed all these faction crests and little meditating monks. I started getting into some like Buddhist philosophy and like studying Aikido, which is a form of martial arts, and like, where does their energy and power come from? And I ultimately ended up deciding it's better to keep it somewhat mystical. And I'll explain a little bit more of it when you dig into the fiction. If you do read the books for Twilight Monk, the novels, for example, specifically, I got really into like, where does their power come from and whatnot. But back then, it was really just doodling out ideas. Every idea wasn't really solidified until I had like sketched it out or drawn it on paper. Once it was drawn on paper, I was committed. This character ended up not really even becoming anybody important, but it was probably the groundwork for the original concept of the idea behind the ancient monks of Twilight, the people from whom Raziel inherits all of his skill and his ability. But they were back then, they were just sort of like mystical symbols, and so these like fledgling portions of the idea of what the ancients were. Now, I didn't know anything about making video games at that time. I just started working as a pixel artist on a Game Boy Advance game. But I was picking up a lot of books on, like Yoji Shinkawa's art of Metal Gear Solid, or, some of the art books that you'd get for some of the games that were coming out at the time. It was the beginning of the era of concept art. And so I realized I need to be able to do turnarounds, like being able to see the character from the front and the side. This is something most artists still don't want to do, but it's an important part of your character design. I didn't know what I was doing. I had never been hired to do this, but like doing the call outs, I had known that if you want to make an action figure or a toy out of your character, you had to be able to have all those details. Because I had some Creed action figures made back in the day, and I needed to do turnarounds for that. That was my first exploration into that. But with these, I thought, well, I'll try to create a character that's got like, nice, interesting side view, front view. I didn't want to draw the symmetry. There's before the symmetry tool existed in any kind of digital drawing program, and I didn't even draw with a Wacom back then. In fact, all the coloring that you saw was mostly me drawing with, my gosh, I think I was coloring with a mouse, but all this stuff is drawn on paper, for the most part. So when you're building out your character design, you got to just like create loads and loads of cool poses, and some of these characters ended up really kind of becoming what I would have considered like other monks from the monastery. I was trying to figure that out. That guy became Tomo. And then some of these other characters, like I still may explore later. You could definitely see that, like, the big feet. You can see the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles influence on my work. And, I was always a big fan of Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, and they're great guys. I've met them several times. They even like let me use the TMNT in a Creed crossover back in the 90s. So we were pals, but I always looked up to them so much. I always wanted Twilight Monk to be like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And in my mind, I'm so narcissistic and delusional that I believe they're exactly as cool. I'd like to think. I don't know. This character here up in the top corner, I liked him so much that I ended up like doing a much bigger scale illustration of him. Here you can see this. The character, I don't think I ever actually used him for anything, but this was ink on paper. You can definitely see that Shinkawa influence, that kind of sumie brush. And then I used white paint or white out, to like kind of create negative space and white out some of my line work. I was definitely using a brush pen at the time, or a brush dipped in India ink. And this definitely has that like early 2000s vibe, that art style of that era. But you can definitely see like that's the same character. The idea came from the thumbnail. Then I worked out a bigger drawing of the same character. And like, yeah, that was my process at the time. It was like explore a million ideas in doodles while I'm at the dentist or waiting for a bus or something, and then go home and do like a bigger drawing of it, whenever I had time in between playing gear. This is some of the first Photoshop painting that I ever did, and you can definitely see I didn't know what I was doing. There's so much crazy detail, and it's hard to read. It's hard to see what's going on anywhere, There was a nice separation of warm foreground with the cooler background, but my values are all over the place, and I didn't understand how to control my values. And what I mean by that is like, yeah, sure, if you zoom into one little part like this, you can get a pretty clear read on like, that's like a cool door, and there's the lantern and the doorway and the window and the opening. And this would have been a cool crescent aisle, by the way. It ended up changing. But like when you zoom out, like there's so much going on everywhere, and it just ends up becoming cluttered. And even though there is this nice separation of foreground and background, all the stuff in the middle just kind of gets a little confusing. I didn't know how to control all that. And it's something that I try to shortcut that for everybody who takes my lessons or, learns from me, all the things that I learned about how to control a little bit more readability in your artwork. Check out some of my tutorials here on YouTube or in my workshops to like learn what I learned and really save yourself a ton of time. It's kind of the whole reason I started my YouTube channel, really. So around this period of time, I guess this was maybe like 2002, maybe 2004, actually. Yeah, because it was, look, for consoles 3 and GameCube. So this would have been like, yeah, 2004, 2005, right around the time they announced that. GameCube was already out, yeah, and Xbox was not out. Notice that. So the 360 anyway, it was the original Xbox. So like, if you're thinking about like designing a game, you should start with your world building, like create your summary of what is the cool sales pitch of what your content is. I'm not going to go too much into like how to build a game pitch. I might do a workshop about that or do a couple of videos about that here on YouTube. But you can see where I was kind of just collecting, look, his name was Octavius back then. I was collecting a lot of the content to put it together in a way that seemed like you could envision the creatures and the world around the character. But again, I didn't really know how to put together a good pitch. Don't use this as any kind of an example of, what a game pitch should be, because at that time I had only ever made 1 or 2 game pitches and they were advanced games. None of those like really made it. Like now I could put together a pitch that would sell, but back then it was really just like a collection of images and, see, box, not the 360. So like, yeah, I'm placing this around 2004, 2005 era. It's probably the pitch that I put together for So I was pitching Twilight Monk as a 2D platformer, and I will show you guys the early Flash demos. I will show you all that stuff in a future history of Twilight Monk video. But I want to dig a little bit more into the comic book stuff because, again, my idea of pitching a universe was through storytelling. And you can see here where I was drawing these pages literally like actual size. I was trying to do a manga, really. And I needed to be able to draw like 2 or 3 pages a day. And that's while working at a game studio. So I literally I would go home and just draw all the time. But you can see here where like, I didn't really know how to separate my foreground and background. It's not really easy to see what's happening in this page. I was just obsessed with detail because that's what people seem to want from me coming off of writer. And that's something that people wanted from me. And I tended to get a lot of a positive response from just having globs and globs of detail at that era of time. But ultimately, I don't think that that's the best way to present a comic book page. And in fact, I was really just trying to challenge myself with storytelling or creating good panel to panel flow. And so in some of the many other pages that I created around this period of time, I would say I created probably about like 30 or 40 pages for what I was trying to pitch as a manga. And you can see like a lot more action going on in these pages as well. Now, that is not what I was known for with Creed. Creed was not an action comic, and so when I finally got to doing something kung fu related, I was like, oh, I'm going to go over the top. I'm going to have like the character like spinning around and like kicking monsters in the face. And this particular scene, I was so stoked to draw it because it was like, these creatures were jumping out of snowdrifts. They ambushed him, and back then, he would use a variety of different weapons. He'd like come out swinging and kicking, and then his feet would catch on fire. And it was just like crazy powerful, like weaponized elemental kicks and whatnot. And so I also wanted to dig into things like, the character doing training and things like that, but like foot sweeping. And then, yeah, there's him training with like an old, I think that's the original design for Toka. Almost looked like he had a mask on, up at the top. But teaching him, oh yeah, like here's how you harness electricity, right? And then here's how you like create like water. You can summon water or ice. And then here's how you can like summon flame, So like the idea was to present this character that could like tune into multiple different types of elemental attacks. But you can definitely see like the intention here of learning like how to flow panel to panel. He literally kicks the silhouette of the creature's head off of his body. That's gruesome. But I didn't want to pull any punches, I wanted it to be ruthless. I wanted it to be like jam-packed with action and crazy intense violence, that was the original concept of it as a manga. I loved how manga just would not pull any punches, Oh, this is the original Crescent Island. You can see how it kind of looks a lot more like this now, actually. And here's like a close-up. I loved doing this kind of stuff. This is when I fell in love with doing concept art, like getting into the intricate details of things. This is a Now, this is a page that ended up, gosh, you can see. So back then, Twilight Monk was very much part of the Creed universe. And here you can see Octavius with old Henry Lamplight. And these are creatures from Twilight Monk interacting with characters from Creed, so only the most hardcore fans of people who followed my comics all these years would recognize the sort of combination of the crossover that's happening here. But I thought it was pretty cool. Oh, here you can see the line art for that Crescent Isle piece. See, again, I love black and white art. I love line art. It's just like a nice clean read on that, There's no confusion as to what you're looking at, whereas like sometimes you get into the color, it's like, it's just everything's pulling my attention. It's all so intense. Color is so intense to me. I like line art. I like sketch line art. I like the raw like pencils of something and the raw inks of something. Anyway, so a little while later, I got a little bit more serious about doing a comic. And so I bought some actual manga board. This is like 9x13 manga board. And I started to get a little bit more serious about it. You can see here, like, there's a cool airship that I later used. There's a weird angle on this camera here, the second frame down, but overall, like, not a bad start, and then the character like jumps out of this thing and I cut that page out, and then he's like sneaking into this fortress of creatures, these are storm shadows. If you follow the novels or if you've seen any of the other comics, and he like bonks him on the head, So like, again, digging much more into the panel to panel flow, the storyboarding of telling a comic book story. And I know like there's some people that are going to be watching this and they're going to be like, oh man, like, look, there's the barrel. There's the barrel that's in the game, like, yeah, this is a sequence of him sneaking into this fortress using a barrel as a disguise. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, he does that every now and then. It's just sort of a hobby of his. It's something he likes to do. And this is the fortress, although I think I ended up using this fortress as the design for the monastery itself, so that scene would have to be completely redrawn. Here's a nice, cool inked page. That's him jumping out of the barrel and sneaking behind this guy. Look at this. I don't know if you can see it. Let me pull it up a little closer here. Yeah, so like that's him hiding gear style behind a pillar as this storm shadow with a lantern is walking by, and then you can see him sneaking by him down in this bottom panel here. And then he runs off down that hallway, that corridor. So I don't know how he pulled that off, but he did. This was just a rando page from something else that I was going to do with him, like fighting a big stone spider mech, kind of a thing, throwing these kunai daggers into him. And then that one, oh no, that's not, that's from something else. You didn't see that. Much later, I would get even more serious about making the Twilight Monk comic, and I actually ran it as a webcomic for about 2 years. While I was working on Diablo 3, it was exhausting to work on such an incredibly demanding game and still somehow manage to come home on my weekends and draw a comic. But who's laughing now, right? I mean, hey, I got a couple of comic books that I made. These were fun to do, and I'm super proud of them. Someday I might put them together into sort of a final manga, like a complete, I'd love to finish this story, actually. There was sort of a nice precursor to the events of the game, as well as the novels that came out soon after this. And I will dig into these a little bit more, and I will dig into the novels in a future episode of the history of Twilight Monk. So there you have it. That's like an early look at some of the first stuff from Twilight Monk. It's, not super glamorous. I know it's a lot of unfinished stuff, but you got to remember around that period of time, I was working on Fight Streetwise. I was learning about storytelling. I was learning how to be a concept artist. And in many ways, I kept thinking, if I keep shipping more and more successful video games, like, then maybe then I would have the credibility enough to be able to finally do Twilight Monk. And yeah, it took 20 freaking years and I got shot down. Like a lot of people, I see artists that complain a lot about like, oh, well, it's just easier for some people or whatever. And like, man, I got to tell you, it took years of getting rejected after time. People ignore your emails, agencies ignore your emails, publishers ignore your emails. And yet you still come back fighting, like you try to post about your book that you've been creating all this time. You put your soul into this stuff and they're like, yeah. Well, sure, you worked on that famous stuff, but like you were just a cog in the machine there. And it's like, well, okay, fine. What do I got to do to freaking prove it. So, I just kept fighting and fighting and fighting, and it's hard because it's almost like a part of your soul dies every time your work is rejected. But then when you finally do have something that's a success, it's like suddenly all those same people start calling you, and you can't get rid of them. It's constant. So I know how that goes, and I ultimately decided, you know what, just screw all of it, just do the thing you love, because at least you're enjoying the work. And I know that there are some people out there that could relate to that a little bit. I don't know if it helps you, but I can tell you, if you don't have raw talent or easy opportunities, just freaking fight through it. One of my favorite characters in the last few years is a character from, and his whole thing is that everybody around him's gifted with these ninja abilities. It seems to come easier to them. He has none of that ability. His superpower, though, is his raw determination. He makes it even harder for himself because he knows every time he overcomes that challenge, he's getting stronger. And in fact, he can hold his own with these guys that don't have to train much at all. They're just naturally gifted. But in a lot of ways, they respect him more because he had to earn it. And I can tell you, man, there is great pride in the work that you do when you frickin' earn it. And I can tell you, if it ever felt like I earned anything, it's like I fought for 20 years, got derailed many times, fell off of the track, even I had my regrets too, times when I thought, oh, I should have got back to doing indie stuff with Twilight Monk years ago. But I never gave up. And what's my reward? Hey, guess what? We finally have the Twilight Monk game coming out. I do really sincerely hope that you enjoyed this first look into the history of Twilight Monk, and I hope you enjoyed the game Twilight Monk. Know that it was never easy. It may look like we're just having fun, and we are. Believe me, success is fun. Just making something you've always wanted to make, it is fun. When it does finally come together, we are having a good time with it, but it is after a lot of hard-won battles. And yeah, maybe someday I'll do that. I'll put together that Twilight Monk comic. I'll do it as a manga, though. I want to do 200-page tankobons. I love that. I love that idea of a nice meaty story to dig into, a big universe to dig into. If you can't wait for that, check out the World of Twilight Monk art book. It's available in paperback over on Amazon, or you can pick it up on my Gumroad channel. If you want to learn anything that I know how to do, if you want to learn how to draw comics or make video games or concept art for video games, check out my other workshops over there on Gumroad. I love helping people along the way on their journey as well, and I've helped a lot of artists to reach their dreams, to be concept artists working in games or make their own comics. So I hope you'll join me. Please do subscribe, and I'm trying something new. I'm going to be posting a lot more frequently. I'm going to be posting shorts. So check those out here on my YouTube channel as well, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Ciao.